Ben Walker paid $4 for a house everyone called cursed. The roof caved in, the walls barely standing. He only wanted a place to sleep. But that night, his dog Ranger started scratching at the corner wall, until a rotted board broke loose, revealing a steel door sealed shut. Behind it lay a forgotten laboratory, a dusty workbench, a machine draped in cloth, and a burnt leather journal that read, "If you find this place, please finish what I could not." Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support truly means the world to us. The late autumn sun hung low over Willow Creek, casting amber light across cracked sidewalks and fields of brittle grass. The air was dry, filled with the faint scent of dust and fallen leaves, the kind of air that made memories stir. And for Ben Walker, a 46-year-old veteran with tired eyes and calloused hands, memories were all he had left. Once a Marine in Iraq, he had returned to an America that no longer had a place for him. The war had taken his wife through grief and distance. Then debt had taken his home. Now he slept behind the market dumpsters, a blanket of cardboard beneath the stars. His only company a loyal German shepherd named Ranger, black and white fur dulled with dirt, eyes the color of fading steel, the patience of a soldier carved into his bones. Ben's mornings began the same. He'd rise before dawn, wipe the dust from his jacket, and wander into town hoping for a day's work, fixing fences, unloading trucks, sometimes sweeping the floor of Marcy's diner in exchange for a meal. Marcy, a red-haired widow with sharp humor and soft eyes, always slipped him extra bread for Ranger. "You look thinner every week, Ben," she'd say. He'd smile, that half-smile of men who've seen too much and expect little. Pride was a fragile thing. His had worn down like the soles of his boots. That morning, while resting on a bench outside the Willow Creek courthouse, Ben noticed a worn bulletin board plastered with old notices: missing cats, church bake sales, foreclosure auctions. One piece of paper, yellowed and curling at the corners, caught his eye. In bold, uneven letters it read, "Property sale. Abandoned estate. Price $4. Buyer assumes all responsibility." A joke, he thought at first. $4 barely bought a sandwich, but the address, 327 Maple Hollow Road, was real. He asked the clerk inside, a gray-faced woman with reading glasses hanging by a string. She squinted at him, unimpressed. "You want that place? Fine, no one else will. Roof's caving in, taxes unpaid, probably snakes by now." Ben chuckled softly. "Snakes don't bother me." The clerk shrugged, slid a thin folder across the counter. Her name tag read, "Margaret Lyle," thin lips, nicotine-stained fingers, and the air of someone who'd long stopped believing in new beginnings. "You'll sign here, initial there," she said, "and pray it doesn't fall on your head." Ben pulled the 4 crumpled dollars from his pocket, his last. They trembled slightly in his rough hand. For a moment, Margaret's eyes softened. Maybe she saw the quiet desperation in his face, the same kind that used to haunt her late husband before the factory shut down. But she said nothing, just stamped the papers, sold, and pushed them toward him. By afternoon, Ben and Ranger were walking the dusty road that led out of town. The pavement gave way to gravel, then dirt, lined with oak trees whose leaves had turned copper and brown. Ranger trotted ahead, tail low, ears alert. The farther they walked, the quieter the world became. No cars, no voices, just the whisper of wind through branches. When the mailbox appeared, rusted and tilted, Ben stopped. The faded letters barely readable. Miles. He looked at Ranger. "Guess this is home." The driveway was more a scar than a road, overgrown with weeds, cracked stones, and the skeletons of forgotten plants. The house emerged slowly from the tangle of brush, 2 stories of decay, a gabled roof with missing shingles, one shutter hanging crooked like a broken limb. The front door leaned open, split along the frame. Vines crept across the walls like green veins choking an old heart. For a long time, Ben just stared. The place looked ready to collapse under the weight of silence. He felt something twist in his chest. Not disappointment, not yet, but that hollow ache of realizing how far you've fallen. He walked to the porch, boards creaking beneath his boots. Ranger sniffed the air, muscles tense, then let out a low bark. One short, sharp sound that echoed through the empty hall inside. Ben placed a hand on the dog's neck, feeling the warmth under coarse fur. "Easy, boy," he murmured. "We've slept in worse." The sun dipped lower, painting the house in gold and rust. Through the doorway he could see dust swirling in the light, like ghosts rising to greet him. Somewhere deep inside, a floorboard popped, followed by another sound. Faint, metallic, as if the house itself had exhaled. Ben set down his worn duffel bag and stepped onto the threshold. $4, he said quietly, half to himself, half to the house. "Let's see if you're worth it." He crossed into the dark entryway. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of rot and something older. Oil, maybe, or time. Ranger followed, nails tapping softly against the warped floor. They stood there, two survivors in a place long forgotten, listening to the heartbeat of a dying house. Outside, the wind shifted, rustling the dry leaves across the porch. For the first time in months, Ben didn't think about tomorrow, about work or food or the debts he'd never repay. All he thought was, at least tonight, we have walls. He glanced down at Ranger, whose ears pricked toward the shadows ahead. The dog gave a single, quiet woof, cautious but curious. Ben managed a tired smile. "Maybe you see something I don't, old friend." And with that, they moved deeper inside, unaware that the house had just begun to breathe again. By the time the sun dipped behind the sycamores, Ben had cleared a space in what used to be the living room, or something close to it. A single armchair sat crooked near the fireplace, its stuffing peeking out like the bones of an animal long gone. He spread an old blanket on the floor, the kind the military issued years ago, rough and olive green, and set his duffel down beside it. Ranger curled nearby, his ears twitching at every creak. Dust hung in the air like mist. Through a broken window pane, wind slipped in, brushing against the torn curtains. The house seemed to sigh with the night. Ben tried to sleep, but the silence had teeth. Every groan of the wood, every distant clatter felt alive. Around midnight, Ranger shot upright, fur bristling, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. The dog's gaze fixed on the staircase that led down to a half-buried basement door. Ben pushed himself up, heart pounding. "What is it, boy?" The wind outside answered first, a moaning note that drifted through the cracks, then faded into something else. A metallic rattle. He grabbed his flashlight, its beam cutting a trembling line across the hallway. "Probably a rat," he muttered, but even as he said it, he knew it wasn't. The sound came again, a faint clink, deliberate, almost rhythmic. Ranger let out a sharp bark that echoed through the emptiness before settling back into silence. At dawn, the light through the windows was pale and dusty. Ben rose stiffly, determined to face whatever the house was hiding. He opened the back door to let Ranger roam the overgrown yard. The dog trotted out, sniffing weeds and old roots, tail cautiously low. Inside, Ben began clearing debris, broken chair legs, glass shards, and heaps of rotted paper that had fused into the floorboards. Behind a pile of rusted metal scraps near the dining archway, something caught his eye. A bronze plaque, tarnished but still legible. He wiped the grime with his sleeve. The engraved letters read, "Property of Dr. Henry Miles, 1985. He frowned. The name meant nothing to him, but the way it gleamed through decades of neglect felt wrong, like something waiting to be noticed. He carried it outside, washed it off with a trickle of water from an old garden hose, and tucked it under his arm as he walked to the gas station at the edge of town. The station attendant, Earl Donovan, was a thick-set man in his late 50s, with oil-stained hands and a voice worn smooth by cigarettes. His gray beard was trimmed short, his cap embroidered with Willow Creek Auto and Fuel. Earl had been there as long as anyone could remember. Gruff to strangers, loyal to locals, a man who hid his kindness behind sarcasm. "That plate from the Miles place?" he asked the moment Ben showed it. "Hell, I thought they bulldozed that dump years ago." Ben shook his head. "Still standing. Barely. You know anything about him?" Earl scratched his chin. "Dr. Henry Miles, scientist, inventor, maybe genius, maybe lunatic. Worked on some government energy project back in the 80s. They shut him down, said his experiments were dangerous. He vanished after that. People said the house was cursed. Power lines around there used to flicker for no reason. Kids swore they saw lights in the windows." That night, back at the house, Ben sat near the cold fireplace, listening again. The wind returned, crawling through the walls with a whispering hum. Ranger's head snapped toward the same spot as before, near the floorboards under the staircase. The dog barked once, low and sharp. Ben knelt beside him, running his hand along the baseboard. One section felt loose. When he pressed it, a sliver of light appeared through the seam, a dull yellow glimmer, pulsing like something alive. He froze. The house was supposed to be dead, just wood, dust, and ghosts of the past. But here it was, breathing again. He whispered, almost afraid to hear his own voice. "What the hell are you hiding, Dr. Miles?" Ranger whined softly, leaning against his side. Ben stared into the darkness below the stairs, the faint glow flickering back like an answer. The night deepened, carrying the sound of wind against the old walls, no longer random, but almost speaking. The next morning broke in muted shades of gray and gold, sunlight crawling lazily through the cracked windows. Ben sat by the fireplace drinking lukewarm coffee from an old tin cup, his breath steady, his mind restless. Ranger lay at his feet, half asleep but still alert, the kind of sleep only soldiers and dogs share, where rest and readiness blur together. The faint metallic rattle from the night before still lingered in Ben's thoughts. He couldn't shake it, that rhythm like a heartbeat trapped beneath the floor. When the dog suddenly lifted his head and growled low, Ben knew they'd found their next step. Ranger stood and walked to the narrow hallway under the staircase, the same spot he'd stared at for 2 nights straight. His claws scraped the wooden planks, tail stiff, ears angled forward. Then he began to dig, furiously, determined, sending flakes of rotted wood flying. "Easy, boy," Ben said, crouching beside him. The wall gave a hollow echo when he knocked. Something was there. He grabbed a crowbar from his duffel, wedged it between the panels, and pried. The first board split with a groan, then another. Dust exploded outward, a choking cloud that reeked of iron and mildew. Beneath the boards, half buried in grime, was a steel door, small and square, its hinges rusted orange. A padlock, ancient but unbroken, hung from the latch. Ben wiped his arm across his brow, leaving a streak of gray dirt. "Guess you were right, Ranger." He pulled a wrench from his bag and struck the lock. It held. On the third blow, it cracked open and fell with a dull thud. He gripped the handle, cold, gritty, and pulled. The door creaked inward, releasing a wave of air that smelled of old metal, oil, and time. Ranger barked once, sharp and uneasy. A narrow stairwell descended into darkness. Ben switched on his flashlight, the beam cutting through the dust like a blade. "Stay close," he murmured. The stairs groaned under his weight as he descended, step by step. The space below wasn't large, but it was deliberate. Stone walls lined with shelves, tables covered in long-forgotten tools, coiled wires, and broken glass tubes. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, dead but still swaying gently as if disturbed by breath. On the far table lay a cylindrical machine, covered by a heavy tarp thick with dust. Next to it, a workbench held jars of bolts, rusted instruments, and a burned leather notebook, its corners curled from heat. Ben picked it up carefully. The cover cracked beneath his fingers. The first line, written in shaky ink, made his pulse tighten. "If anyone finds this place, please finish what I could not." He turned the page. Inside were sketches, complex circuits, magnetic coils, mathematical equations beyond his comprehension. Words like sustained energy conversion, field resonance, and infinite cycle. The margins carried frantic notes. "They are coming. Hide the core. It must not be used for greed." Ben closed the book slowly. The air in the room felt thicker, charged, as though the very walls remembered. On one shelf stood a framed photograph, its glass cracked but image still visible. A man in his late 50s with high cheekbones, hollow cheeks, and intense gray eyes stared back. His hair was slicked neatly, though strands had escaped their order. The name etched below, Dr. Henry Miles, 1985. He looked both proud and exhausted, the face of someone who had lived long enough to see his genius turn against him. Ben sat on an overturned crate, the notebook heavy in his hands. He felt the old soldier's ache in his shoulders, that blend of wonder and dread, familiar to those who've seen things they weren't meant to. "Energy," he whispered. He was trying to build something that lasts forever. Ranger pressed against his knee, eyes fixed on the covered machine. The tarp fluttered slightly, though no wind touched it. Ben reached forward, hesitated, then stopped. He could almost feel the pulse beneath the cloth, a hum faint and steady, like a sleeping heart waiting for a command to wake. He exhaled slowly, standing. "Not today," he said to the darkness, as if the house were listening. "We've found enough ghosts for one morning." He closed the notebook, tucked it under his arm, and climbed back up the stairs. Behind him, Ranger turned once toward the room before following. As Ben pulled the door shut, a soft metallic click echoed from within, as though something down there had just taken a breath. Ben couldn't sleep that night. The notebook lay open beside the small lamp he'd fixed from spare wires, its pages trembling slightly under the faint breeze seeping through the broken window. The words of Dr. Henry Miles stared back at him. "The energy of the world already exists. We just need to stop wasting it." His calloused fingers traced the ink, each line feeling less like theory and more like a plea. Beneath the text, sketches showed the cylindrical device he'd found under the tarp, identical in every mark and curve. Ben rubbed his temples. "You built this thing, Doc?" he murmured. "And maybe it built your grave." Ranger raised his head from the floor, tail brushing the wood once before resting again, as if he too was listening to the ghosts between the lines. By morning, curiosity had rooted too deep to ignore. Ben descended into the basement again, flashlight swinging from his hand. The air felt denser, carrying the metallic tang of rust and something almost electrical. He approached the machine, the same steel cylinder wrapped in fabric, like a body waiting to be uncovered. "All right," he muttered. "Let's see what you're hiding." He gripped the tarp and pulled. Dust exploded outward in a shimmering cloud, and when it settled, the contraption revealed itself in full, a polished copper body scarred with time, coils wrapped in green wire, a glass dome atop its center that refracted his light into faint rainbows. A small control panel sat at its base, its levers labeled in Miles's sharp handwriting. Field, current, phase. Ben crouched, inspecting the base where cables met a power socket that hadn't seen electricity in decades. "You don't belong in a house," he said softly. "You belong in a dream." He turned one of the dials. It resisted, then clicked gently. A low hum followed, so faint he thought he imagined it, but Ranger's ears perked, body rigid. "Easy, boy." Ben brushed his hand over the glass dome, and a static spark jumped to his skin. He jerked back. A pulse of pale light flickered deep inside the machine, no brighter than a candle, but alive. "Jesus," he breathed. Ranger barked once, wagged his tail, then stepped closer to sniff the base, his reflection shimmering across the curved metal. Ben found a smaller switch near the edge, corroded but intact. "Auxiliary power," it read. His thumb hesitated above it. Every sensible thought screamed not to, but war had burned most of his fear away. He pressed it down. The hum deepened, then spread like a vibration through the floorboards. Overhead, something clicked. A light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered once, twice, and then, after decades of darkness, came to life. It cast a dim amber glow that danced against the peeling paint and cracked stone. Ben froze, staring at it. Ranger whined softly, tilting his head. "You seeing this, boy?" Ben whispered, voice shaking with disbelief. The bulb buzzed faintly, its glow steady and warm, and for a strange moment the house didn't feel dead anymore. He sat on a nearby crate, eyes fixed on the golden light above. The silence had changed. It no longer pressed on him like weight, but wrapped around him softly, like a memory that finally exhaled. He thought about Miles, working here alone decades ago, maybe watching this same bulb glow for the first time. He imagined the man's face, proud, terrified, hopeful. "You did it, didn't you?" Ben said quietly. "You made something the world wasn't ready for." He leaned back, exhaustion flooding in, but it was the kind of tired that came with wonder, not despair. Ranger rested his head on Ben's knee, eyes half closed, comforted by the warmth. As the light swayed slightly from the ceiling, dust drifted like gold in the air. Ben laughed, rough and genuine. "Maybe this place never wanted to die, Ranger. Maybe it just needed someone to listen." Ranger wagged his tail, a low rumble of contentment in his throat. Somewhere deep within the machine, a faint pulse of light continued to blink, steady and patient, as if waiting for the next command. Ben didn't notice the small gauge on the control panel twitch upward once before settling. He only knew that for the first time in years, something in him flickered alive too. The light in the basement stayed on for 2 nights straight before Ben dared to tell anyone. He wasn't sure what scared him more, that it worked or that he didn't understand why. The bulb above the machine glowed like a heartbeat, pulsing faintly whenever he walked by. On the 3rd morning, he folded the burnt notebook into his jacket and took the early bus north toward Portland. Ranger followed close at his side, his thick black and white coat catching the morning dust. The trip was long, the kind that gives a man too much time to think. By the time the bus hissed to a stop near the industrial district, Ben's decision already felt heavier than the book in his hands. The workshop sat between 2 warehouses, its front window painted with fading blue letters: Linton, Electrical, and Restoration. Inside, the air smelled of metal shavings and warm oil. Sarah Linton stood at a workbench, sleeves rolled to her elbows, sparks flickering from a soldering iron. She was in her early 40s, tall, slim, with sun-marked skin and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. Her hair, once auburn, was streaked with silver and tied into a low braid that brushed against her neck. There was a calmness in her movements, the kind of steady focus that came from years of fixing broken things, and maybe from fixing herself. A faint scar ran along her right temple, a souvenir from a factory explosion years back, the same event that had pushed her to leave corporate work and help veterans rebuild their lives. She looked up when Ben entered, squinting at the figure in the doorway. "Walker?" she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "Didn't think I'd see you again. What's got you all the way from Willow Creek?" Ben placed the notebook on her table. A house, or maybe something inside it. She flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. field resonance, kinetic containment. My God, if these calculations hold, this isn't a generator. It's something else. She glanced up, brow furrowed. Do you realize what this could mean? Ben shrugged, the soldier's way of hiding wonder. All I know is it lit a bulb without a line. Sarah leaned closer, her voice low. If this is real, Ben, this could be what every energy conglomerate has been pretending doesn't exist. Free power, the kind that would end their control overnight. They drove back to Willow Creek that afternoon, Sarah's old green pickup rattling like an old song. The road wound through fields gone gold with late autumn. Ranger lay in the truck bed, tongue out, content beneath the wind. When they reached the house, the light in the basement was still burning, steady and alive. Sarah stared at it for a long time. This is impossible, she whispered. And yet. She knelt beside the machine, tracing the copper coils with her fingers. He really did it. 2 days later, as Ben was repairing a broken window frame, upstairs a man in a dark suit pulled up outside in a black sedan. Mid-40s, trim build, narrow face, hair slicked too perfectly. He carried himself with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Introducing himself as Mr. Grant, he claimed to represent a private collector interested in historical technology. His tone was polite, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "We're willing to offer $50,000 for that contraption you've been working on," he said. "No questions, no publicity, just a quiet transaction." Ben stared at him, jaw tight. "It's not for sale." Grant's smile sharpened. "Think carefully. Houses like this have a way of collapsing." Ranger growled then, a low primal sound that made the man step back involuntarily. "You should keep your dog on a leash," Grant muttered, before turning to his car. The sedan disappeared down the road, leaving dust and unease in its wake. Sarah came out from the porch, face pale. "That wasn't a collector," she said. "He didn't ask what it was. He already knows." She folded her arms, eyes scanning the tree line. "Ben, someone's been watching this place." Ben looked toward the horizon, where the sun was dipping behind the ridge, and felt something stirred deep in his chest. Not fear, but the heavy calm of a man preparing for a fight he didn't start. The next few days passed in quiet devotion. The house on Maple Hollow Road no longer felt like a ruin, but like a wounded thing healing beneath their hands. Ben and Sarah worked side by side in the basement, surrounded by the scent of oil, dust, and copper. Tools lay scattered across the table, a soldering iron, a voltmeter, a mess of color-coded wires that Sarah handled with patient precision. Ben's role was the steady one, tightening bolts, replacing broken seals, keeping the old lantern burning when the night grew too heavy. Outside, the world carried on unaware that inside a forgotten house, two people were trying to finish the dream of a man lost to time. Sarah had shed her usual composure. She spoke less, moved slower, her face illuminated by the flicker of the lantern as she examined Dr. Miles's blueprints spread across the wall. "He must have worked alone for years," she said softly. "Every equation here is built to sustain itself. He wanted something eternal." Her voice trembled slightly, awe and sadness intertwining. Her silver-streaked braid had come loose, a few strands clinging to the sweat on her temple. She looked older, but also more alive than Ben had ever seen her. He respected that kind of resilience, the kind forged by disappointment and purpose in equal measure. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the ridge, Ben carried a can of kerosene up from the yard to fill the lamp. Ranger followed, pressing close to his leg, tail brushing his jeans with quiet reassurance. The dog had been restless lately, pacing near the windows as if sensing something watching from the trees. "We'll be fine, boy," Ben whispered, resting a hand on his fur. "One more night, and it's done." Ranger leaned into him, eyes gleaming amber in the dim light. When the final adjustments were complete, Sarah tightened the last copper coil and wiped her hands clean on a rag blackened from work. The machine stood silent but ready, the smooth metal body gleaming faintly in the lantern's glow. She exhaled. Everything's connected. It should... She paused, meeting Ben's eyes. It should work now. Ben nodded, his broad shoulders squared, face rough with exhaustion but steady. Let's finish what he started. The night air slipped through the broken window, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth. Ben moved to the switch, the same one that had once awakened the machine's heartbeat. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the metal lever. You ready, Ranger? The dog tilted his head, tail thumping once against the floor. Sarah stood behind them, silent, her lips pressed together. The moment stretched like the pause before a storm. Ben flipped the switch. The reaction was instant, a low hum that deepened into a pure tone, smooth and unwavering. Then came the light, a single pulse of white that burst from the machine and spilled across the basement walls. It was not harsh like electricity, but soft and living, flowing through every crack, every scar of the old house. The glass bulb overhead bloomed into brilliance, then dimmed into a golden hue that filled the air with warmth. Dust motes turned to stars. The shadows vanished. The air smelled faintly of rain. Sarah covered her mouth, tears streaking through the grime on her cheeks. He did it, she whispered. He really did it. Clean energy, endless, silent, pure. Her voice broke. Ben leaned against the workbench, chest rising and falling, eyes reflecting the glow. $4, he said hoarsely, almost laughing. Who'd believe it? He looked at Ranger, whose ears twitched as if listening to something beyond human hearing. The dog's tail wagged once, steady and sure. The light reached up through the cracks in the ceiling, spilling into the rooms above, out the shattered windows, and into the night. From the road, the house seemed to breathe again, alive after decades of silence. Ben stood still, letting the warmth soak into his skin. Sarah rested a hand on his shoulder, voice trembling. He left the world a miracle, Ben. He smiled faintly, eyes soft. No, he said quietly, watching the light dance across Ranger's fur. He left it a chance to start over. It started as a whisper in the newspapers, a rumor about a miracle born from a $4 house in a forgotten town. Within weeks, engineers, reporters, and scientists from all over Oregon flocked to Willow Creek, following the trail of what they now called the Miles Walker reactor. Sarah handled the attention better than Ben did. She was used to blueprints, not microphones, yet she spoke with clarity and grace. Cameras caught her standing beside the glowing machine, her hair pulled back neatly, eyes alight with purpose. This isn't just energy, she told them. It's proof that creation can come from faith and failure alike. The world believed her. Ben watched from the edge of every crowd, his hands shoved into the pockets of his worn jacket, Ranger sitting loyally beside him. Fame had never suited him. He had seen too much of the world's noise already, the parades, the promises, the sudden forgetting that always followed. Yet when the governor's office awarded them the Oregon Restoration Grant for advancing clean energy, Ben accepted the envelope with quiet gratitude. Inside was enough money to do what he had wanted from the start, give the old house a second life. Weeks turned to months. The sound of hammers and saws replaced the wind that once haunted the broken halls. The roof was repaired with new cedar shingles, gleaming under the autumn sun. The faded walls were painted a soft cream, and the front steps, once rotted and uneven, now stood solid beneath freshly polished rails. Grass grew again where weeds had ruled, and the old sign, Miles Property, was restored in bronze, shining proudly above the door. Sarah often stopped by to check the systems, her presence quiet but grounding. She'd bring pie from Marcy's diner, and together they'd share it on the porch, Ranger lying between them, his muzzle now showing streaks of gray. The townsfolk had changed too. They slowed when passing the house, tipping their hats or smiling softly. "Used to be dead, that place," they'd say. "Now look at it, brighter than the sun." Children sometimes peeked through the gate to see the famous dog from the news, and Ranger would wag his tail, patient as ever. Ben always waved them off with a grin, the kind only peace can give. One late afternoon, when the world seemed wrapped in gold, Ben sat on the porch steps. The air was still, warm enough that he left his jacket unbuttoned. Ranger rested his head on Ben's boot, breathing slow and steady. Across the yard, sunlight caught the new window glass and sent little fragments of light dancing across the floorboards. Ben smiled, eyes distant but content. "You see that, Ranger?" he said quietly. "We finally got ourselves a home." The dog's tail thumped once, and for a moment everything was silent, the kind of silence that hums with life. Deep below, in the basement, the reactor glowed with a soft, living pulse. Steady, pure, eternal. It was the same light that had once risen from despair, now breathing warmth into the walls of a house that refused to die. Two forgotten souls, one man, one dog, had given it life again, and it, in turn, had given them something even rarer: belonging. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or angels. They come quietly, through worn hands, loyal hearts, and a little bit of faith. The story of Ben, Ranger, and the house that rose from ruin reminds us that God still works through ordinary people who refuse to give up. If you've ever felt lost, remember, even the smallest spark of belief can light your darkest place. Share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, love, and redemption. May the light that filled Ben's home fill yours too, and may God bless every soul watching, guiding you to find your own $4 miracle.